Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pro Wrestling Mecca of the world in Cleveland, Ohio. I am your dangerously, dashingly, strikingly, sexy, good-looking host, Nick. And with me, as always, is nobody. This is PWP TV. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. You want to hit the show, the Gmail's ProWrestlingPod at gmail.com. Once again, ProWrestlingPod at gmail.com. The Twitter page is at ProWPodcast. Once again, at ProWPodcast. Available on iTunes, Podcast Addict, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, and right here on YouTube. I will leave a link for all that good stuff below. And this month we have been talking about wrestling controversies has been the theme for this month. So far we've talked about the unfortunate death of Owen Hart, the Montreal Screwjob, and the curtain call. So today we are going to be looking at the mass transit incident. Now, this is something that surprisingly, and I was very shocked when I was looking it up, there wasn't really a whole lot of retrospectives done for the mass transit incident. And I thought that it was very, very odd. This is something that is well known throughout wrestling history. So for there to not even be anything about it was a shock. So anyway, what is the mass transit incident? Well, to put it in the most simplest way I possibly can, ECW, the original ECW, was running a show in a small town, Massachusetts. Revere, Massachusetts was the name of the city. And this was right before their very first pay-per-view, Barely Legal. And Axel Rotten, who was teaming with Devon Dudley at the time, he couldn't make the show. He couldn't make it due to having, I believe it was just car problems or something. He wasn't going to make the show. And in his place, Paul Heyman, and you got to keep in mind, this is 1996, so Paul Heyman is only taking the people to these shows that he needs. He's not taking any extra because he can't afford it. Well, since Axel Rotten wasn't there, Paul Heyman starts freaking out. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to change the match. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do that. Well, a kid, and I say kid because that's what he was, by the name of Eric, I'm not sure what his last name was. He said, "Hey, I'm a wrestler. I trained with, I believe it was Killer Kowalski, was who he claimed he trained with. Who Killer Kowalski is the same guy who trained Triple H, for any kind of reference whatsoever." So Paul Heyman said, "Look, I don't have time for this. If he's a trained wrestler, he's good to go." So he puts him in the ring, and it's Devon Dudley, it's New Jack of all people, and Mustafa, and this kid. I just had his last name and it just escaped me. We'll call him Mass Transit for the sake of this video. So all four guys are in the ring, and the match, the first 30 seconds of the match was a typical style ECW match. Next thing you know, kid takes a shot from New Jack. He doesn't sell it at all. New Jack gets pissed. Now, for anyone who knows ECW, you know New Jack. For those of you who don't know much about ECW, New Jack's not the kind of guy that you want to get angry. He is just not that kind of guy. So New Jack beat him basically within an inch of his life. And New Jack, it goes without saying, New Jack has had a history of doing this. And the kid was just bleeding profusely. I mean, it was just bad. And you heard someone at ringside saying, ring the bell. He's only 17. Now, the legal age to wrestle at the time was 18. So he was technically, even though he was on the border, he was still underage. And as if that's not bad enough, he also lied about being a trained wrestler. He was not a wrestler. He was, I believe 400 pounds, and I could be wrong. He was around that weight limit. And no one knew this at the time. There was no way for any of them to know. He came in, he lied about his age, he lied about having experience. He comes in and he's wrestling against probably not just the most dangerous wrestler, because I use that term lightly when I describe New Jack, probably the most dangerous person in all of America at that time. New Jack was and still is not a kind person in that ring. He is a very violent person for a reason, because that's psychologically, that's just who he is. And for you just to want to say, I'm going in there, I'm going to face New Jack, I don't know what you're thinking. That is just, even if you had wrestling experience, even if you were of age, voluntarily wanting to wrestle New Jack is something you should not want to do. And he did it. Well, there was a lot of backlash. The biggest one was ECW, who had this deal to be on pay-per-view. That went out the window. They no longer had that deal. So they lost their pay-per-view spot. Another big one was that the Kid tried to sue ECW by saying that, it was attempted murder from New Jack. And, I'm not saying it was, because obviously, A, I wasn't there, and B, I would be shocked if New Jack legitimately tried to murder somebody, but I guess at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if he did. I think that regardless, the Kid needs to understand, and his dad, who was the one that said, hey, ring the bell, he's only 17. Both of them need to understand, you don't have experience. The kid is underage, and the dad should be the one who went to jail, because you are knowingly putting your underage son in a position to where he could either A, get injured, or possibly, God forbid, killed. And I just don't think a sane person can look at that and think that it's an okay thing to do. There's no logical and logistical way of looking at it. If that was to happen today by WWE, just throwing this out there, WWE has a small show and they only bring X amount of wrestlers. Say they needed 10 wrestlers that night. Say AJ Styles couldn't make it. So they're not going to look at someone in the crowd and say, oh, you were trained by so-and-so? Oh, you're of age? Come on in. They're not going to do that. A, because they're a publicly funded company, they're not going to do anything that has lawsuit written all over it. And B, and most importantly, they're not a contracted wrestler by them. And this is something that Paul Heyman should have realized from the get-go. You should not have trusted someone that says that they're a wrestler. They don't have any name credibility. No one knows who they are. So why on earth are you letting them wrestle on your show? Now, again, I wasn't Paul Heyman at that time, so I can't sit here and say this is why he did it. This is why he shouldn't have did. I can't say any of that. Just looking at it retrospectively with a clear mind and not having any inside information at that time, there should have been every fiber in your being that says, no, I'm not going to have you wrestle because I don't know who you are. I don't know if you were trained by Killer Kowalski. I don't know your age. It's not like you're showing me your birth certificate, so I don't know any of this. I don't know if it's true or not. And plus, you're not a worker for me. So if you were to get hurt, I'm liable. And that to me is the biggest, most strangest thing about the whole thing, is that Paul Heyman just let this happen. Eventually, ECW did get their pay-per-view back on because the fans actually petitioned very hard for ECW to get that show back on, and they did, and it went off without a hitch. Now, I will say, looking back, there's always, and I'm in no way am I coming to the Kid's defense, but there's always been that part of you that's like, I really wanted to wrestle. I really think I should do this. Then you go through the legal channels. You go through everything you need to do. I can't feel bad for you when you put yourself in that position. And unfortunately, he did pass away due to gastric complications from a surgery he had or something. I don't know. I'm not fully sure. I don't know the details. But it was something that left a pretty bad mark in ECW's lifespan. They didn't really have a whole lot of. It's strange looking back at it, because ECW didn't really have a whole lot of controversies like that. We'll call them controversies. They had the mass transit incident. They had Raven crucifying the Sandman. I mean, if you want to call Paul Heyman shooting on TNN about TNN controversial, which it is. I mean, 3, 1 I think is kind of minor, but You would think that ECW probably would have been around for maybe like a year with everything that happened. But either way, that will do it for this edition of PWP TV. You want to help the show? The Gmail is prowrestlingpod@gmail.com. Once again, prowrestlingpod@gmail.com. The Twitter page is @ProWPodcast. Once again, @ProWPodcast. You can listen to the show on iTunes, Podcast X, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, and right here on YouTube. My name is Nick, and I'll see you guys next time.